So Talk to Me has been kind of a buzzy, smaller horror film that's been a part of film conversations for most of the year. It had its debut actually at the Adelaide Film Festival back at the end of last year in October, but it also was shown to some critics at the Sundance Film Festival earlier this year as well, I believe. And so a lot of people had reactions to it when it first had its first screenings back then, but also the filmmaking duo behind this, the Philippou brothers, they had their start on YouTube, actually. They were making short films and TV series and different clips on YouTube about 10 or 12 years ago and actually garnered quite a following. Their YouTube has millions of followers, millions of views across different videos that they produce, but they've always had a hunger and a desire to get into feature filmmaking. And so they finally had the chance to do that with Talk to Me, which is a fully produced Australian film and a co-production with Causeway Films as well. And they also had one of the filmmakers behind the scenes who worked on the Babadook to help produce this movie as well. And so it's very much an Australian type of movie with a lot of Australian flavor and even Australian actors that you might not have heard of. But we got a chance to check out this movie because it released in theaters a few weeks ago and it's become sort of a breakout hit. Produced at a very, very
Hmm.
small budget, about $4.5 million, and has already grossed, I think, over $47 million right now. So a very, very
Mm.
successful horror movie. But with all of that out the way, man, I will pass it over to you. What did you think about Talk to Me?
So this movie, for those who haven't seen the trailer, is about a group of friends who they figure out how to somewhat conjure spirits by using an old embalmed hand, and they become addicted to it. It becomes the new party trick. It becomes the you don't go to the high school house party to drink and smoke. You go to hold the hand and conjure these spirits. And man, oh man, this movie is dark as hell. I knew it would be, I think, a very somber, dark movie, but the levels in which this movie goes to is it's crazy. It's almost never any hope in this movie, to say the least. But with that being said, this movie is not just a horror film for the sake of horror. It actually has a story to tell. There's actually something behind it. We do live, I think, in the time of just trauma. It is what it is. And I think we're bringing a lot of that trauma to our movies, to our music. People are being more open about it. Everybody's not only going to therapy, but they're using a lot of these projects as their therapy. And in A24, I think, is one of the best distribution studios out here, because they not only let you pretty much make what you want. They won't only distribute some of these lesser talked about stories, but because they're able to, I think, have a brand where they're like, okay, do what you want. There are no holdbacks. There's no breaks. We're not going to come back and tell you, you can't do this, you can't do that. And a lot of the horror films, I think, definitely are rewarded because of that, right? Imagine if somebody told Ari Aster in Hereditary, oh, spoiler alert, by the way, oh, she can't die. You know what I'm saying? Like, imagine they were like, oh, she can't go out like that. She can't die. Things that are disturbing just work because some of them are realistic. And I think Talk to Me, of course, as spiritual as it may be, has so much realistic trauma in it that exists, that it allows, I think, the viewer to say, damn, this is weird, but I also understand everything that's happening here. And for that, it makes a good horror film to me, because in essence, a good horror movie actually has something in it. It actually has something that people can relate to. It actually has politics, but now in today's age, a good horror film has some good trauma in it. And that's what this movie is. The main character has lost her mother at some point in time, and it is really the story of her and how she can and how she both deals with the loss of her mother with whatever the hell's going on at these parties, without giving away too much. And so it's pretty enjoyable. The performances, again, I don't know any of these actors and actresses, Sophia Wilde and Alexandra Jensen, Joe. I don't really know them like that, but I think they all did a tremendous job acting across the board. This is just another one of those movies that feel fresh. And again, it's because it is able, I think, to give its whole heart to the story for the most part, and it is dark. And so I really enjoyed this film, man, to be honest. I don't really have too much to say. It's not, don't get me wrong, the perfect movie in the world, but man, I like a lot about it. I think the runtime is good. I think some of the scares, which I really like, are perfect because it's not all jumpy. Some of it is quite literal. You looking at the screen and being like, holy shit, what is going on? Horror, not necessarily, oh my God, that thing was scary, but this idea is scary. This crazy thing that's happening on screen is scary. I can't imagine if that was me going through this kind of scary. And for that, man, I think Talk to Me is another one of those secret hits that we have. I actually can't wait till this comes out on streaming. I think on streaming, this thing is going to go crazy, even as it's doing really good in the box office. You said, how much is it making right now?
47 million right now.
47 mil on a 4.5 mil budget is nuts. I don't think people understand. This movie's making a lot of money. And so I'm pretty excited, I think, for the future of horror because they continue to do things like this. But man, shout out to A24. Shout out to Danny Filippo and Michael Filippo for putting this movie out, man. But Talk to Me, it's different. It's different and it's good. And I really appreciate this.
So I think, really horror as a genre is really, it's really notable due to the eras that it sort of operates within. I mean, all genres
Mm-hmm.
have eras that you can sort of point out and say, like, well, that was the era for this genre, or this
Right.
genre particularly leaned into this type of storytelling. And right now we're in the era of grief horror. That's really dominated horror films for the past decade plus, I would say. I mean, there's so many examples. You mentioned Ari Aster with his works Hereditary, Midsommar, Luca Guadagnino with the remake of Suspiria, even more recent movies like Beau is Afraid that came out this year, Smile from last year. All of them have elements of grief and traumatic experiences really embedded within their storytelling that sort of drive the narrative propulsion of the story that's at play. I don't know necessarily where it got its start, but I do find it interesting that I would say probably the most notable era that preceded the grief horror era was probably this era of, it was post 9/11 sort of nihilism, where we were getting all of the crazy Saw movies, the Hostel
Mm-hmm.
movies, where they were just
Yep.
incredibly gruesome and gory and just no regard for human life at all. Like, your pure enjoyment off of those movies was kind of based off of the fact that you really enjoyed seeing people put to their wits end and dealing with the most heinous circumstances possible. So it might have been only logical that the very next step in terms of the next era of horror that we were going to live in was much more based on emotion and personal life experiences. I think that that's kind of the natural progression. And so I would credit James Wan as sort of being like the nexus point, because he was very much a part of that nihilism era,
That's
but he
true.
kind of shepherded this new era as well. When you think about particularly the Insidious movies, I know you just saw the recent one,
Mm-hmm.
which wasn't great, but like that first one relies a lot on grief and trauma and past
Yep.
experiences, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
now it's just evolved to this place, and Talk to Me is sort of the latest installment in what I would say is an incredible run for horror movies, especially coming off of last year and to
Oh
some
yeah.
extent this year as well. It's been a pretty solid year, and Talk to Me is no exception. I really enjoyed this movie. I had such a great time with it. The characters here are so interesting and so well developed, because what I think works really well about Talk to Me, it's not doing entirely new things, but it's almost the way that it's presented
Mm-hmm.
that feels new, because we are focusing on teenagers, and we're focusing on this idea that at that particular age as a teenager, you feel invincible. You feel like nothing can touch you. You feel like you can dominate the world and do whatever you want to do. I think we've all been there, and we've put ourselves in situations that, looking back on that, it's like, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have acted that way. But the characters here, because they are teenagers and they are about to go to college very soon, they present themselves as invincible, because the very premise of this is allowing yourself to be put in a position to where your life is at risk. You are doing something that you should not be doing. You are allowing demonic forces and possessive forces to literally overtake you for the sake of having fun. And then what's even more disturbing about it, we now live in an era, and we have been living in an era, where everybody pulls their phones out. Everybody's ready to record shit.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the key scenes in this movie, without giving anything away, it happens at the beginning of the movie. Everybody pulls their phone out. That's what they're more focused on, as opposed to the well-being of that person, right? And so it
Right.
speaks to just kind of the mentality of how we think at that particular age and how we operate and move
Mm-hmm.
within the world. And I love that that was just such a a pivotal component to this movie. And then you get even deeper into the story, into some of the mythology that they're building here. And they do an incredible job at just sort of world building on a smaller scale at that, but really sort of building out this world and this idea of this presence and this force that's kind of bigger than any of the main characters at play. And then you take it an even step further, which is the thing that probably surprised me the most, is the fact that this movie is gruesome. It is very disturbing. There are some very,
Yes.
very troubling scenes to watch where I was sitting there kind of gripping my seat like, oh shit, this is really uncomfortable. And this is really
Mm-hmm.
violent, violence to a degree that I just didn't see coming, because a lot of these more recent A24 or indie budgeted horror movies, they kind of go for more opaque and ambiguous ideas and themes and imagery. They don't always lean into violence. Some of them
Yeah.
definitely do, don't get me wrong, like a Hereditary, but some of them kind of do a little bit more of an ambiguous sort of approach to violence and what the implications are. But this doesn't really do that. There are a few key specific scenes that certainly ratchet up the violence and the blood and the gore to a degree which isn't comfortable to watch. It's not Evil Dead. You know, Evil Dead knows what it is. It's campy to an extent when it introduces buckets and gallons of blood. This doesn't do that. This is very realistic in its presentation, and it presents a really, really troubling story. And I think that that sense of dread that existed all throughout this movie was always present from the very opening scene, which is a shocker. You feel the sense of dread that's just slowly but surely approaching our main characters, and you sit by and you're sitting on the edge of your seat waiting to see how it's ultimately resolved. And so this was a very tense experience. I think the sound design was also incredible because, as you noted,
Mm-hmm.
the use and the lack thereof of jump scares is really brilliant. The way that they deploy them so succinctly and expertly throughout the movie, it's very conservative compared to a lot of other movies, but they do it in such a smart way versus just like moments where you're just tense because you don't know what's going to happen next. I think all of that stuff built to a great, great crescendo with the finale. And ultimately, it really worked for me. And then the final scene was just like, it takes your breath away. It's like, oh my God, this is wild. And this makes so much sense. And it really brings it
Mm-hmm.
full circle. And what I'm really excited to see is that A24, and they know what they have on their hands. They've already greenlit a sequel. The directors are already working on it. And when you watch this movie, you can kind of tell where it might go. Like they have a
Yeah.
natural next pathway for what the sequel
Mm-hmm.
could or could not be. And so it could be that following our main characters here, or it could be examining some other characters. So there's all sorts of possibilities at play. Just one quick follow up I want to ask you. I asked you this earlier this year. Is this the best horror movie of the year? We've gotten some hits so far. We've gotten The Evil Dead Rise, we've gotten Scream 6, we've gotten Boa's Afraid and
Ooh.
Megan and Knock at the Cabin. There have been some good ones. There have also been some smaller indie movies that have come out, even some of the more comedic takes like The Blackening. I mean, there's all sorts of horror movies that have dropped this year,
Mm-hmm.
but where would this rank for you in terms of the horror films that we've seen in 2023?
Man, it's hard because there's some bangers in here, man. I really like Scream. I also really, really, really like Evil Dead Rise, man. Right now, because I to be honest, I want to watch some of these back to back spooky season. I need one more pass at like, okay, which one of these is the king? But to be honest, right now, top three is probably Evil Dead Rise, Scream, and this, and Talk to Me. It's probably my top three. Right now, I'm probably putting Evil Dead Rise at the top. I think that movie was just a lot of fucking fun. I think they were having a ball with that film. So I think right now that's my favorite of the year. And there's some a lot more to watch too this year. Actually, it's a lot of horror films. Actually, we still have to watch. But for right now, I'm gonna go with Evil Dead Rise, and I'm gonna put Talk to Me in my second spot. I liked it a lot. So yeah, we'll have to see upon rewatches and upon some of these other movies that come out. But for now, it's probably like my second horror film of the year.
You know, I think that this might be my favorite so far of the year, and I only say that because Evil Dead Rises, it's amazing. It is fucking balls to the wall, just the most ridiculous. Like you think you've seen Evil Dead, and then they take Evil Dead and just like inject it with steroids. It's a really
Mm-hmm.
crazy movie, but I think the reason I would say Talk to Me might have taken my place as the favorite of the year is just because it does feel new and different. Like going into Evil Dead, I knew what we were going to get. That's not
That's
to say
true.
that it didn't surprise me because it absolutely
Mm-hmm.
did. There were things that happened in that movie that I did not see coming, but it's a franchise. It is like the fourth or fifth or sixth installment in a franchise. You know you're going to get over the top gore and blood and violence and demonic possessions, and it's going to just be some of the most shocking imagery that you've seen. But again, it's almost campy to a certain extent, which is great. I love that about Evil
Mm-hmm.
Dead, and that's what it excels at. But this one, it just had me really on the edge of my seat, and it did so many things that I didn't expect, and I just loved again the way that it ended. Was really kind of a shocker for me, but there
Same.
is a lot that still has to come out this year, and there are things that we have to catch up with, and so it's been another, I think, really successful year for horror. Once again, it's still, I think, in contrast to our conversation that we're having about these other genres like superhero films or animated films, horror continues to be extremely reliable. We see the
Yeah.
successes. They produce these films on these very, very small budgets, and enough people go see them and have a great time. And it's one of those few genres that having that communal experience in the movie theater actually aids in the performance and the perception of the film. We just
Mhm.
naturally have a better time at watching the movie. I couldn't imagine watching Evil Dead Rise not in the movie theater, or Scream 6, like not
Ooh, for
experiencing
sure.
that with the community of people. It's such an important piece of it. So we will certainly have to see. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on the brand new A24 horror film Talk to Me. If you've checked out this movie, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.